American Sniper by Chris Kyle with a little help from Scott McNewen and Jim D. Felice. What's up, guys? It's Chet Morgan, another chapter by chapter. And this book is a little bit different than the ones that I've been doing previously. I generally stick to books about business, leadership, and communication. But because I decided to read a book a week, I had to expand my horizons a little bit. This was a book that I bought back in high school, and it's kind of sat on my shelf ever since. So I figured now would be the best time to read it, and it turned out to be a really good book. As you know, these chapter by chapters, I take you step by step through the entire book. I give you some of my thoughts and feelings along the way. As always, please like the video, comment what book you want to see me do next, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will keep making these videos. So let's begin. So chapter 1 of the book is titled Bustin' Bronx and Other Ways of Having Fun. So this chapter is all about Chris Kyle's background, how he grew up, where he grew up, and such. And Chris Kyle is a Texas boy. He grew up all across Texas, moving time to time because of his dad's job. And like any Texas boy growing up, he was, always outside. He was hunting. He was pretty rough and tough at times. He said that him and his brother were never allowed to start a fight, but defending themselves was another story. So he was kind of always tussling growing up, and was definitely one of the tougher kids around. And growing up, Chris Kyle got involved in rodeoing, and he was known as a roper in school. So he was all about riding the bull, and doing it very, very well. But he did get in a really bad wreck, where he broke several bones, had to go to the hospital, and he eventually became like a rancher. So Chris grew up, he graduated high school. He was still working on a ranch, and he went to college because he wanted to do something along the lines of owning and operating a ranch. But the more he did it, the more he kind of got curious about joining the military, which was something that he always wanted to do. But his parents really wanted him to go to school first. So the older he got, the more he kind of got curious about joining the military. And right away, he kind of went to a recruiter's kind of mall. So every branch of the military kind of had a booth set up here. And he first went to the Army, because I think they were just the first ones that kind of caught him on his way in, because he really wanted to be involved. He didn't just want to be kind of enlist and be whatever. He really wanted to be involved in the military, and the Army, he didn't really necessarily want to do, but then the Navy called out to him and, introduced him to this Navy SEALs idea, which was very much what he was looking to do. However, because of the bull riding incident from earlier, he had some pins in his arms, and they said that he couldn't be in the military. And this kind of took the wind out of Chris. So he went back, he quit school, and decided that he was going to, do this ranching thing full time, which he did. He ended up moving to Colorado for a short bit of time to work on another ranch. And just when he kind of was getting settled down in Colorado, the Navy called again. They said, do you really want to join? And he was like, absolutely. But what about the pins? And they were like, don't worry about that. And that's when he basically started his entry in the military. Chapter 2 is titled Jackhammered. And chapter 2 is about his entry into kind of becoming a Navy SEAL, where every Navy SEAL has to go through a BUDS training, which stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEALs, which is just basic training to become a Navy SEAL. And here, Chris Kyle said that they absolutely kick your ass. This is kind of where the infamous Hell Week, if you watch the History Channel, they've done, series on this, where it's 132 hours straight of physical training, which sounds insane, with the details that he gives about just the absolute trauma that it must put on a body. But it's all about just kind of training, getting ready for their missions. And Chris said that the best way to get through this was he took it every 6 hours, because they feed you every 6 hours. So he's like, just get to the next meal. And it sounds absolutely excruciating, but he got through it. And throughout the whole training, it is pretty cold. They're constantly swimming in the ocean and getting out and boating and all these other things, and it caused them to shiver, and that's where the title jackhammered comes from, because they were shivering like jackhammers. And the one part that is kind of funny is that they have a bell you can ring if you've had enough and you quit. You have to ring the bell, so it's embarrassment, for quitting in front of everyone. And then you're treated to a warm cup of coffee and a donut. So they just kind of wiggle it out there for you, tempting you to quit. But it takes a real mindset to get through that. And then soon after the Buds training, when he was still kind of doing other trainings and things, he found his girlfriend at the time, Taya. They met in a bar one night, and things just kind of kept getting more and more serious throughout, I guess, the time, and ends up becoming his wife at some point. But he was staying at Taya's house the morning of 9/11, 2001, where he woke up. He got the call that he had to come to base to kind of get things prepared. And he was speeding down from like south of Los Angeles, going down to San Diego. And the local PD stopped him on their way because he was obviously flying down the freeway. And they, talked. He explained that he's a SEAL and he had to get to base. And they gave him a police escort part of the way, kind of through their jurisdiction, which sums up kind of that first training session, the second chapter, going on to the third. And the third chapter is titled Takedowns. So this skips to Chris being deployed. He's in the Middle East and he's doing these takedowns, which were routine missions for him there, where they basically at any time of the day, morning or night, they would get up, get in a boat, haul ass across the sea, to track down a boat, because there was some intel that on the boat there was, missiles or weapons or something that shouldn't have been there. So they'd get on the boat, and they had to have papers, saying their inventory or whatever it may be. And sometimes, these went smoothly. They checked the papers, they were good. They checked the papers, they were bad. Other times they would, have to get on there with a fight. So this is the first kind of bit of action that Chris oversees. And here he explains his first dust storm that he experienced overseas, which is just a hot pile of dust that, fills the air, turns everything dark. He had to, he got to shoot a machine gun on the back of an ATV. He said that over there, the first time there was a lot of desert training, but there was not really a whole lot of action at this first bit. And he was actually worried that during his 9 months being deployed, he wouldn't actually get to go out and fight at all, because he was kind of just a few weeks to the end, and hasn't seen any action. The fourth chapter is 5 Minutes to Live. And here we get more of, or kind of the first dose of Chris's war stories. So he's got a handful of stories throughout the next few chapters. But you get a lot of detail, and it's pretty remarkable to hear kind of what he did and his mindset throughout each and all the missions. Which some that I touch on earlier definitely get really specific, which I was really surprised out of reading the book. Not that I really expected anything going in, but it was one thing that really kind of took me back, was just how much detail, and you get to see just his mindset throughout war and what it really takes to be a soldier. The fifth chapter is Sniper. So here we get right at the beginning, his first time coming home post deployment. And he said that he was already kind of jumpy and a little bit more stressed out. You get to see how just dedicated he was to serving our country right away. Within his first time coming back, all he wanted to do was go out and help his boys. But he went through sniper school with his time back home, where he really started to like kind of what he was doing. And he liked the direction that the snipers was going. So he liked their missions more. He really wanted to become a sniper. We also got a rundown of his favorite weapons to use, both kind of everywhere that he went. So different cities versus rural. There's just a handful of different situations that he talks about where he prefers certain weapons in one spot and other ones at a different spot. He also touched on that the training through sniper school taught him to be more observant, which I thought was interesting, because he started to do everything with a little bit more intention. Like every time that he would go out and about, he'd just be more observant and try to become more and more observant, because to be a sniper, you really want to be observant, which I thought was just interesting that he used kind of everyday situations to get better at the thing that he loved to do. Another part that I thought was really interesting about this chapter was he talked about the seals run-ins with wildlife while diving. And I thought that was really interesting because that's one thing you don't really think about, I guess, or I don't think about. And he said through his time in the ocean, he was beat up by dolphins, bitten by a shark and a sea lion, which I just think it's the things you don't think about that you also have to be protected from when you're diving. During his time back home, he also got news that he was going to have a son with Taya, which is this first kind of bit of family that we see, that he starts like developing a family, but he still feels an obligation to be overseas. And that's really his number one priority that we see throughout the whole entire book. And then he does go back overseas shortly after his son was born. And he goes to Fallujah, which is kind of his first time in real heavy combat, where he gets, I mean, all sorts of stories. Some that, he brings up as funny, some that aren't funny. And he really gets a lot of emotion throughout this chapter, this part, where you see just a real change kind of with the way that he views things and the way he really gets a passion for serving his country. And the thing that he'll put in front of everything else in his life is his country. In the sixth chapter, which is called Dealing Death, we get an inside look at Chris's time with the Polish forces, which were allies, guess, during this time period. And I thought it was really interesting because he learned things from them and they learned things from us, which he then used, kind of implemented, through his day to day life. I guess without being in the military, I just kind of assumed, you learned everything in your training here, and that we kind of know the best ways to do things, but that's not always the case. And he really demonstrates it good here, where he learned so many things that he used throughout other situations and in combat that he wouldn't have learned without working with these folks. The seventh chapter is titled Down in the Shit. And this one, again, filled with multiple encounters, multiple battles that he went through. This time he was in Baghdad. So it kind of takes place there, which explained a few different kind of top shots that he had throughout his career here. And he said the weirdest shot was he shot out these beach balls that informants were basically swimming with. And instead of just like taking out the target, he shot the beach ball and they sank, and he took out the enemy that way, which I just thought was interesting. And around that time, he got nicknamed the Legend because of that. Chris did say that Baghdad was a little bit more laid back than his previous time in Fallujah, which I thought was pretty interesting because during his time in Baghdad, he was hit with multiple IEDs while they were driving and basically came out unscathed. But during his whole time in Baghdad, you really saw a lot more struggle with his family, not only his wife, but his wife with a brand new son, but his parents as well. So there were multiple kind of encounters where Chris was calling them on the phone in the middle of a kind of a combat zone during a downtime, and then shots came through, and he basically just had to hang up because he had a job to do. But one of the times when he was talking with Teo, like he didn't hang up. So she basically heard this whole entire firefight, and then didn't hear from him for a few days until he got back to base, which you see a lot of her kind of struggles with just the anxiety aspect of really not knowing what he was doing or where he was or how he was doing. So you see that start to build and build throughout the rest of the book. And another piece that you learn through this chapter that you really start to see, and Taya outlines it, that Chris becomes kind of like a machine of war. And he really starts to lose regard for his role in his family. And he thinks that, he's got a job to do, and that's to serve his country. And that, if he dies, that, someone else will take his place at home, which she really didn't like. And chapter 8 is titled Family Conflicts. So another time he comes home from overseas, and Taya kind of says that each time he comes home from deployment, he's a little bit more distant with her. They're both just a little bit different because they've been away for so long and kind of grown a lot without each other. So there's some stress there. And then with his son, and then during his time home, they decide to have a daughter. So there's just a lot that happened in his personal life, that there's just a lot of stress there. And then during his time home here, they went to the hospital for Chris to have like a cyst removed, and he ended up having a seizure. And during that, it was completely fine. They didn't know what caused it or anything. And he basically talked him out of leaving it out of the report because if you have a seizure, I guess you couldn't be deployed. But during this kind of situation that he was dealing with, his wife went into labor with their daughter, and he, rushed over there. They delivered the baby, and then 2 days later, he had to basically deploy. So he was right again being sent out, leaving Taya then with the boy and the girl at that point. Chapter 9 is the Punishers. And the Punishers became a nickname for his unit, because they were basically, a squad of Punishers. And they had the white skull painted on, all their gear and the cars that they took. And it was kind of a really cool thing of pride that Chris then takes even after his time in war with his company that he starts. You'll see that Punisher skull is kind of on the logo of that. And then we get a little insight on Chris's time in Ramadi. And during his time in Ramadi, he also lets us know a little bit about the reasoning behind the war in the first place. And they were really just trying to teach the Iraqi army to fight, because these organizations that we were fighting over there weren't like part of the country. They were just groups of people that were trying to do terror and bad things to Americans. But he was really frustrated because they were supposed to teach the Iraqi army or military like during combat, which really isn't a good thing. He said that he wished they could just go in, take care of the job, and then teach them, how to fight from there, because they were a bit like liabilities, trying to show someone the ropes while you're getting shot at. Chapter 10 is the Devil of Ramadi. And the Devil of Ramadi is the nickname that Chris got from the insurgents. So they knew that this sniper was going out and basically wreaking havoc on their people. So they put a $20,000 bounty for his head. So they wanted him to basically die because he was taking out so many of these people. And then we get a little bit of insight on their missions of setting up cops, which are like headquarters in different cities, and then different strategies to get to these places. So we just get more stories on Chris's combat and different situations that he was in. Chapter 11 is titled Man Down. And in this chapter, we get a lot of emotion from Chris, which we really didn't see before. But he had a buddy in his unit named Ryan, or his nickname was Biggles because he was this big, goofy guy. But he was introduced a few chapters back, but he comes up again because he was, as they were going through like the streets of Ramadi doing, some recon work or whatever, maybe. They took a few shots, and one actually bounced off his gun and got him somewhere in the head or the face. So he went down. Chris ran up to him, picked him up. They tried to get him into like a rig to get him, some medical help. And during this time, Chris wholeheartedly thought he was going to die. And this was someone that he was really close with, someone that he really liked. And then we see Chris, he takes a side and he starts to cry because he thought he just lost his buddy, which is a lot of emotion because this warrior definitely didn't show a lot prior to that. And then through more of this same battle, another person in the unit, Mark, took a bullet as well. And contrary to Ryan's injury, Chris thought that Mark was gonna like make it, that it was just like a flesh wound. But when they got back to base, it actually flipped. So his buddy Ryan was gonna make it, but Mark was not. So they had to send him back to the States to have a burial. So then after this, we get a little insight on Chris's thoughts about the red tape of war. So with every confirmed kill that Chris got, he had to do like a write up, basically to make sure that that no like crimes are being committed or that innocent people weren't going down. So he had to record everything like that. And he also had to, or he explained a little bit on that a lot of the people they were supposed to take into custody instead of just eliminating the threat altogether. So he gets a little of his grievances out there. And then at the very end of this chapter, we get news that his daughter is really sick, and the doctors are doing a bunch of tests, and that it might be some sort of cancer. So Chris actually was scheduled to go home in a few weeks, so the officers just sent him back to the States. The 12th chapter is titled Hard Times. So this is Chris is back in America, and he's dealing with just like adjusting to his family life. The whole time, anytime Chris came back, he always wanted to be overseas fighting for his country. And he never really felt right. He felt like a coward basically being home with his family. Whereas Taya was like, a lot of people can fight for the country, but not a lot of people can take care of these kids. You're their father, you need to be here. And one of the adjustments that he had to make was, being gone so long, and then he came back and he had, ideas on how to discipline them and what the kid should do and this and that. So it was really tough for him and Taya at that time to kind of see eye to eye, see where each other was coming from, to parent these kids. And through the stresses of that, Chris brings up all of the fights that he gets in throughout. And then he mentions that his buddy Mike Monsoon died as well, which really just added to the stress. And then, was drinking and getting in these fights, which I read about online that, you know, one of the fights that he got into after, if you watch the interview with Chris Kyle on Opie and Anthony, he says it was Jesse Ventura that he basically knocked down in this bar because Jesse Ventura was talking crap about SEALs, and that just some nasty words is what he was saying on Open Anthony. And Jesse Ventura, they basically sued Chris Kyle because he said that was not me. I didn't say those things, which I go back and forth on. I don't know. Jesse Ventura is a really weird dude. He used to be the governor of Minnesota, which is where I live. And before that, he actually was the mayor of the town I currently live in, which was way before my time. And he's, an ex-SEAL and all this. So you go back and forth, but he's a weird dude. I thought that was a really interesting piece of the book. 13 is titled Mortality. So this chapter takes place in or around Sadr City, which is near Iran, or it might be in Iran. But we get a look at, Chris's last deployment. And here Chris actually takes 2 shots in like the same firefight, which he mentions that, throughout this whole time of being deployed, through his whole military career, he felt like he was absolutely invincible. He went into crazy situations and came out basically unscathed. But here, within one fight, he took 2 shots. One, he was shot in the helmet and knocked his night vision goggles off. And he thought he literally took a bullet and went absolutely blind, but it was just dark and he needed to bring his goggles down. But then one was in the armor that knocked him down. But here we get a look at a 2,100-yard sniper shot that he made, which is the longest that he made. And I think it's the longest shot recorded as well. But then towards the end of this tour, he just experienced a lot of medical problems from combat. He was sore all the time. He couldn't sleep, high blood pressure, but really bad joints that he was basically ready to go home. And the doctor was like, if you want to, you can definitely send out of here. And the 14th chapter is titled Home and Out. And so Chris, didn't want to leave the military, really just wanted to keep going out overseas and fighting for the country. But him and Taya decided that, he should become something that he can stay in Texas for. So he tried to become a recruiter. But the Navy, they really wanted him to fight because he's an absolute warrior. But so they said that he couldn't be a recruiter there. So he was going to look for a job. But he's really stayed in contact with his buddy Ryan from earlier. They became really good friends, and he got married. But tragedy strikes Chris once again because his buddy, right after he found out that he was going to have a baby girl, actually passed away from a complication of one of his surgeries. Because the Navy didn't offer him the recruiting job, Chris started a company with a group of guys. It was called Craft International, which was a sniper school.